At 70, Nell Hartigan had $11, a duffel bag of folded house dresses, and a son who'd stopped answering her calls. She had a corner lot on Williamson Road that the same son meant to sell out from under her, and a bed waiting at a county home he kept calling a transition, as if she were a season and not a person. What she did not have, that gray morning at the Hollins auction lot, was a single living soul who believed she had any business bidding on a rusted-out school bus that nobody else would touch. She bought it anyway, $10 flat. The crowd laughed while she counted out the bill. 3 months later, those same people would be lined up around that bus in the cold, hats in their hands, waiting. They didn't know that yet. Neither did she. Because welded under the back seat of that ruined bus, behind 40 years of rust and a steel lid sealed shut on purpose, was something a quiet man had hidden for most of his life. And when Nell finally pried it open, she found her own name inside, written in the hand of a man who was already gone. The week Dennis listed the lot, Nell sat at her kitchen table on Williamson Road and counted her money twice. It came to $11, a folded 10 she had carried since 1976, soft as cloth and never once spent, and one limp single that had been through the wash. She counted the single twice, not because the number was going to change, but because counting it gave her hands something honest to do. The house behind her was paid off and falling down in the slow, patient way old houses do. Earl had built the back porch with his own 2 hands the summer before his heart gave out, and it still held, which was more than Nell could say for most of what he'd left behind. His pickup was gone. His tools were gone. Dennis had seen to that months ago, calling it clearing things out, the way men like Dennis always had a tidy word for taking. Williamson Road ran north out of Roanoke past the salvage yards and the muffler shops and the gas station, where the coffee tasted like the bottom of the pot and cost $1 even. Behind all of it, the Blue Ridge sat blue and flat against the sky, close enough to touch and too far to matter. It was a working road. Nobody on it had ever had much, and lately, Nell had even less than that. After Earl passed, the church ladies had filled her freezer with tuna bakes and chicken and rice, the way they did. But by spring, the dishes had all been claimed and carried home, and the freezer hummed mostly empty. The church van that used to carry the widows to Sunday service had thrown a rod back in February, and nobody had the money to fix it. So the widows stayed home now, Nell among them. A whole row of front porches up and down Williamson with the lights on and nobody coming. Dennis came by on a Tuesday with a folder under his arm and a man in a golf shirt waiting out in the car. He was 44 and wore the soft, prosperous look of a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that his mother was a problem to be managed. He set the folder on her kitchen table, right on top of the $11, and slid a glossy brochure across the wood. Brennan Development, it said, in clean blue letters. A drawing of townhomes where the corner lot was now, little trees, little people walking little dogs. It's a good offer, Mom, he said. Better than this place will ever be worth. Nell looked at the brochure and did not touch it. Your father wanted that lot kept. Dad's been gone a year. He said it gently, which was somehow worse. You can't keep mowing 2 acres you don't even use. You can't keep living out here by yourself. The home off Peters Creek has an opening, a real nice room, south-facing, and I already put the deposit down. A transition, she said. The word tasted like cold coffee. That's what they call it. He smiled like that settled it. You'll have people around. 3 meals. You won't have to count quarters at the Kroger anymore. She wanted to tell him she counted quarters just fine, that she had counted them her whole life and never once come up short on a thing that mattered. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and said nothing, which Dennis took for agreement, the way he took most silences. The man in the golf shirt tapped the horn out front, once, friendly. The auction's Thursday, Dennis said, scooping the folder back up. County's clearing its surplus lot off Hollins the same morning, so the appraiser can do the both of them in one trip. I already told the man you won't be needing the lot or anything sitting on it. Save everybody the trouble. He kissed the top of her head on his way out, the way you'd pat a dog you were leaving at the pound. Then the screen door clapped shut behind him, and the car backed down the gravel, and the house went very quiet. She had 4 days until Friday, when Dennis meant to move her. She did not yet know that everything was going to turn on Thursday on a gravel lot off Hollins, with 40 strangers laughing. That night, she called her daughter. Carol lived out in Columbus now, with a husband and a job and a voice that got tight whenever Roanoke came up. The phone rang 4 times and went to a recording. Nell did not leave a message. She had left 3 already that month. She knew by now what no answer meant. She called Dennis once more, just to ask if she might keep Earl's old deed box, at least the green metal one he'd kept his papers in. It went straight to voicemail. She sat with the phone in her lap until the screen went dark, and then she sat a while longer in the dark with it. The notice ran in Wednesday's paper, back in the small print where the county listed its legal business. Surplus auction, Thursday, 9 in the morning, the lot off Hollins, a list of what was going under the gavel, 2 dump trucks, a road grader, office furniture, and 1 school bus, decommissioned, sold as is, no title, scrap value only. Nell read that last line 3 times. She could not have told a soul why. It was only a bus. But something about the words tugged at her, low and wordless, some old shape she couldn't put a name to, a bus, a long time ago, a cold day being 20 and broke and a long way from home, and a kindness she had spent 50 years trying to remember the face of and never could. She didn't sleep much. By the gray of Thursday morning, she had made up her mind to walk over to Hollins and just look at it. Just look. She told herself that twice. She put the folded 10 in her coat pocket where she could feel it against her hip, and she packed the duffel bag with 3 house dresses because Dennis was moving her Friday, and she no longer trusted that anything left in that house would still be there when she got back. Then she let herself out the back door Earl built. It was 2 miles down Williamson and over to the Hollins lot, and Nell walked every step of it. Past the salvage yard stacked with dead cars, past the gas station, past the dark little church with the broken van still sitting in the side lot where it had quit. The Blue Ridge stayed blue the whole way. Her hip ached by the first mile. She didn't slow down. The auction lot was gravel and diesel smell, and 40 or 50 people in work coats holding paper numbers. A man named Pruitt ran the whole thing from the back of a flatbed truck with a microphone that cut in and out. The dump trucks went first, then the grader, then a pallet of county desk chairs. Money moved in nods and grunts and the lifting of a finger. Nobody paid any mind to the old woman with the duffel bag. The bus sat off at the far end by itself, like the lot didn't want it touching the things that might still sell. It was an old, short-body school bus. The paint faded from yellow to rust to no color at all, the tires flat and cracked open, one window starred where a rock had found it years back. Weeds had come up through the floor pan. It looked like exactly what it was, a dead thing waiting on the scrap hauler. And still, standing there in front of it, Nell felt that same low tug turn over in her chest, stronger now, close enough that her eyes stung and she could not have told you why. "What am I bid on the bus?" Pruitt called, already bored. "Scrap lot, no title, runs nobody knows. Got a fella over in Salem buys these for the metal. Start me at 20. Anybody. 15, 10, quiet." Somebody laughed, and then Dennis's voice was in her head. "Won't be needing it. Save everybody the trouble." And the dead van in the church lot, and the empty freezer, and the casseroles all carried home, and 50 years of a kindness she'd never been able to picture. Nell raised her hand. $10, she said. The whole lot turned to look at her, 40 faces and not a kind one among them. A man up front said something low to the man beside him, and they both grinned. A woman somewhere laughed out loud, the high, mean laugh of a person glad it wasn't her standing up there. The laughter found her the way it finds anybody who's ever stood up in a crowd with empty pockets. It stung. She kept her hand up. Pruitt squinted down off the flatbed at the old woman with the duffel bag and the steady hand. $10, he said slowly. I got 10. Somebody make it 20. Anybody at all. Nobody did. Why would they? Sold, Pruitt said, for $10, to the lady with the bag. Nell walked up to the flatbed, threw the laughing, and reached into her coat pocket. She took out the folded $10 bill she had carried for 50 years and never once spent, soft as cloth from all that carrying, and she unfolded it the one fold and held it up to him. Pruitt took it without a glance. He had no idea in the world what he was holding. Neither, just yet, did she. By the time she'd signed the little scrap of paper that made the thing legally hers, the crowd had already turned back to the chairs and the grater and the business of the morning. Nobody watched her cross the long gravel lot to the bus that was hers now. Nobody saw her stop at the folding door, rusted halfway open, and stand a moment with her hand flat against the cold metal. Then she climbed the 2 steps, up into the dark and the smell of rust and old rubber, and she went looking for something to sweep with. She had no idea what was waiting under that back seat. She had no idea it had her name on it. The broom she found was hardly a broom at all. Just a worn head of gray bristles wired onto a handle that had snapped clean in 2 and been wrapped back together with friction tape, wedged behind the driver's seat where somebody had left it a long time ago and forgotten it. Nell took it up in both hands like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she went to work on the aisle. She started at the front and moved toward the back, the way she had cleaned every floor she had ever stood on. The dust came up gray and thick and hung in the long bars of light that fell through the dirty windows, and it smelled of rust and old rubber, and something underneath that she could not name. Something almost sweet, the smell of a thing that had been shut up alone for a long while. Outside, Pruitt's voice went on selling the grater, the desk chairs, the last of the county's leavings. In here, it was just Nell and the dust and the sound of the bristles dragging on the metal floor. She swept past seats with the stuffing gone gray and curling out of them. She swept past the window with the rock star in it. Her hip set up its ache by the 3rd row, and she paid it no mind. There was something steadying in the work, something that asked nothing of her but to keep moving. And for the first time since Dennis had set that brochure down on top of her $11, she felt almost like a person again, and not a thing to be cleared out and transitioned. It was when she stopped to catch her breath, leaning on the taped handle in the middle of the bus, that she happened to look up. There was lettering on the roof. Across the curved metal of the panel above the aisle, in careful hand-painted capitals gone soft with age, somebody long ago had lettered 2 short lines. The paint had been white once. It had faded to the color of old ivory, and in places the rust had bled up through it. But you could still read every word as plain as the day a hand had put it there. Route 9, it said, and under that, smaller, Nobody walks. She stood a while looking up at it. Nobody walks. It was not county lettering. The county did not paint anything by hand, and the county surely did not paint a thing like that. A thing that sounded less like a route number and more like a promise a man had made. This was somebody's own words, set up over the heads of whoever rode here, by a person who had meant them. Nell did not know yet what they meant, but she felt them settle on her, the way you feel a hand come to rest on your shoulder in a room you had thought was empty. And she stood under those 2 faded lines a good deal longer than she could ever have explained to anyone. Then she went back to her sweeping, slower now, thoughtful, and she worked her way to the very back of the bus, to the long bench seat that ran across the rear under the emergency door. The back bench sat lower than the others, and somebody had boxed it in underneath with a panel of sheet steel, where all the other seats were left open to the floor. Nell got down onto her knees in the aisle, her hip complaining the whole long way down, and she pushed the broom in under there to clear out whatever had drifted into the dark. The bristles knocked against something that rang, not the flat, dull sound of the floor pan, a hollow, hidden ring, like a knuckle wrapped on the side of a coffee can. She set the broom aside. She reached up under the bench with her bare hand. Her fingers found cold metal and then a seam in the metal, a straight hard line where no seam had any business being. She ran her fingertips along it the way you read a thing in the dark. It went the width of a box, maybe 1.5 feet, then turned a square corner and ran back the other way. Somebody had built a steel box up under that seat and closed it over with a steel lid. And then, she found as her fingers crossed the seam, a second time, somebody had run a thin bead of weld along the whole edge of it, sealing the thing shut, on purpose, to keep it from ever rattling loose on the roughest road in the county, to keep it from being found by anybody who was not willing to get down on their knees in the dark and go looking. Nell knelt there in the aisle with her hand flat against that sealed seam for a long moment, her heart going in a way she did not understand and could not talk herself out of. She needed a tool, and there was not much to be had. She went back through the bus on her knees and her aching feet and found at last in the dented box under the dash a flat-bladed screwdriver gone orange with rust and a tire iron worn smooth at both ends. She carried the two of them back to the rear bench, cradled against her like a woman carrying in her supper. It was slow work, and it was hard. The weld was old, but it was honest, and it did not want to give. Nell wedged the screwdriver into the seam and leaned on it with everything she had, all 120 pounds of her, and when that would not move it, she fit the tire iron down over the screwdriver's handle for the leverage of the length and leaned on that. The metal groaned. A flake of rust dropped onto the floor. She rested, breathing hard, the cold of the steel coming up through the knees of her house dress, and then she set herself and leaned again, and somewhere down the seam the old weld let go with a sound like a knuckle cracking. She worked it the way you work anything stubborn when you are 70 years old and alone and clean out of better options, a little at a time, a little more. Resting when her hands shook too bad to grip. The light moved across the dirty windows while she worked, and the auction broke up outside, trucks coughing to life, men calling to one another and pulling out onto Hollands, one after another, until there was no sound left out there at all. And still Nell knelt at the back of her bus and worked that lid. It gave all at once, the way they always do. The last of the weld parted, and the steel lid came up under her hands with a shriek of metal, and Nell sat back hard on her heels and looked down into the dark of the box she had opened. For a moment she could not make out what was in there. Then her eyes found it in the dim. A book, a thick one, bound in dark cloth, gone soft and furred at the corners, the kind of ledger a shopkeeper might once have kept his accounts in. It had been wrapped about in a square of oilcloth to keep the damp off, and the oilcloth had done its faithful work, because when Nell lifted the book out and turned back the cover, the pages inside were dry and clean and covered, every last one of them in a small, careful, slanting hand. Underneath where the book had lain, tied off in a bundle with an old shoelace, was a thick sheaf of paper certificates, their edges gone brittle and brown. United States savings bonds. Nell had seen one or two of them in her life. She had never once seen a stack like this, a hand's thickness of them, each bought for a few dollars on some long-gone day, and left to sit and quietly grow in the dark under a bus seat for 40 years and more. But it was the book she could not put down. She turned the cloth cover back and held it up to the gray light coming through the window, and she began, slowly, to read. It was a record of giving. That was the only way she could think to name it. Page after page, year upon year, line after careful line in that small, slanting hand, and every line was some small mercy a man had done for somebody, and then written down so as not to forget it. Gave the Mercer family $4 for the light bill, one line read, and don't let on. Carried the Cobb children to school the whole winter their daddy was laid up. Nobody to know. Drove Miss Ada to the doctor over in Salem every Thursday, the gas and the time, glad to. Left a sack of groceries on the Tinsley porch come Christmas. Paid the boy's fare home to his mother up in Bristol. On and on it went, a whole long life of it. every kindness set down plain, and nearly every one of them ending the same way. Nobody to know. Don't let on. Keep it quiet. Keep. Whoever the man had been, he had spent 40 years giving away what little he had to the working people up and down these roads. And he had spent those same 40 years making good and certain not one of them ever learned his face for it. And at the top of every single page, in that same patient hand, the same 2 words she had read up on the roof, Route 9. You have likely already guessed whose book it was. Nell had not. She turned the pages forward year by year through 1971 and 1973 and 1975, reading the quiet mercies of a man she had never met, until she came to a page headed at the top with the year 1976, and the breath stopped in her chest, because there, halfway down that page, in the dead man's small and careful hand, was her own name. She read the line 3 times over before she would let herself believe it. Gave the Hartigan girl $10 and a sandwich, it said. Long way from home and scared half to death, and would not take charity. Told her it was a loan. Told her to build something someday, and we would call it square. Nell sat back against the cold steel wall of the bus, with the book open across her knees, and 50 years came apart in her hands. She had been 20 years old. It was winter, and she had been a long way from Roanoke, farther than she had ever been, on the wrong end of a bad year she had spent the whole rest of her life not speaking of. She had had no money and no way home and no coat worth the name, and she had climbed onto a bus out of the cold only because the driver had not made her show a ticket she did not have, an old short-body bus, half full of working people going home. The driver had watched her in the long mirror the whole way, the way you watch a stray you are slowly making up your mind about. At the end of the line, he had waited until the bus emptied out around her. Then he had come down the aisle, and he had folded a $10 bill into her cold hand, and he had given her a sandwich wrapped in waxed paper out of his own lunch sack, and he had told her a thing she had carried 50 years and never once been able to give a face to. Build something someday. She had never known his name. She had tried, across half a century, to call back his face, and she never could. Only the kindness of it, only the warmth of that folded bill pressed into her cold hand. She had carried it home and meant to spend it, and never had. She'd folded it into the back of every pocketbook she had owned for 50 years, soft as cloth from all that carrying, a thing she could not have told you why she kept, except that to spend it would have been to spend the last of something she was not ready to let go of. It was the same bill. She knew it in her bones before she knew it in any way she could prove. The same man, the same bus, and the same soft folded 10 she had carried since she was 20 years old. And then a colder thought came right in behind the warm one and turned her stomach over. She had given it away. An hour ago, not knowing, she had stood up in front of a laughing crowd and unfolded that bill and handed it up to Pruitt for this very bus, and Pruitt had dropped it into a cash box with all the rest of the morning's money without ever once looking at what it was. The only thing the man had ever put into her hand. She had handed it back to a stranger for $10 of county business and walked away. She was going to get it back. She did not yet know how. But kneeling there at the back of the bus with his book held against her, she knew as sure as she had ever known anything that she would get that bill back if she had to count out the rest of her days in quarters to do it. First, though, she had to learn who he was. The book had given her everything but that. Page after page of a man's whole hidden heart laid open, and nowhere in all of it, not any place she could find, had he ever once set down his own name. She wrapped the ledger back into its oilcloth, gentle as you would wrap a newborn, and she tied the bonds back into their bundle, and she held the both of them against her chest in the cold and the quiet of the bus that was hers now. Somewhere in Roanoke, there had to be a record of him. A man did not drive a route for 40 years and leave behind no trace but kindness. Somewhere there was a name written on a piece of paper in some county drawer, and Nell Hartigan meant to find it. She did not yet know about a retired records clerk named Harlan Voss, or what he would read aloud to her across a courthouse counter 3 days from now. She did not know it would be enough to stop a whole town in its tracks. She only knew, climbing stiff and slow down out of the bus into the empty gravel lot with the Blue Ridge going gold behind it, that for the first time in a year of unanswered calls, she had somewhere she needed to be in the morning. The house she went home to that night sat on the corner where Williamson Road bends toward the salvage yards. A little frame house with a porch gone soft underfoot and a kitchen window that looked straight out on Earl's corner lot, the very lot Dennis meant to sell. She had lived in that house 41 years. She had married out of a rented room and into those 4 walls, and she had buried Earl out of them 2 springs back. And the whole worth of the place, the corner lot Earl had bought a piece at a time across a working life of standing on concrete floors, was the thing her own son had decided, on her behalf and without her asked, that she would not be needing. There was a notice tucked into the screen door when she came up the steps. It was not from Dennis. Dennis had quit putting his own hand to things some while back. It was a folded letter from Brennan Development, all soft gray language about a generous offer and a firm closing date and the great favor they meant to do the neighborhood, and her name was spelled wrong on the front of it. She read it standing in the dark on her own porch with the ledger held against her chest, and then she folded it back along its creases and slid it into her apron pocket. And the strange thing was that it did not land on her the way it would have that morning. That morning, she had been a woman with $11 and a telephone nobody answered. She was something other than that now. She could not have told you the name of what she had become, but she had a man's whole hidden life wrapped in oilcloth against her ribs, and her own name set down somewhere inside it in his patient hand, and a thing he had asked of her across 50 years. Build something someday. She carried that up the steps and into the dark house, and it kept the letter from Brennan small. She did not sleep much. She sat at the kitchen table where she had counted her money the week before, under the same bare bulb, and she read by it deep into the night. And somewhere past midnight she came up out of the pages with one clear and burning thought that would not let her be. The bill. She had given the bill away. The only thing Walter, the only thing the man had ever put into her hand, and she had handed it up to Pruitt for $10 of county business and walked off into the rest of her life. She got that bill back the way some people get religion, all at once and with her whole self, and she was up and dressed before the sky over the Blue Ridge had gone from black to the color of a bruise. She found Pruitt at the auction company's office out past Hollins, a low metal building with a gravel apron, his truck nosed up to the door and the lights on inside, though it was barely day. He was at a folding table with the canvas bank bag open in front of him and the morning's coffee gone cold at his elbow, counting the county's money into neat banded stacks. And he looked up when the little bell over the door went, and he did not, at first, place her. "We're not open," he said. "Sale's done. Anything you bought, you haul yourself." That was said plain. "I bought the bus," Nell said. "The short one, Route 9. Something came into his face then, half a memory and half a wariness, the look of a man bracing for a complaint. "It's sold as is," he said. "I can't take it back. County don't allow it, and I wouldn't if they did." "I don't want to bring it back," she said. "I want to buy something off of you." She came up to the edge of the folding table, a small woman in a clean house dress with her pocketbook held in both hands, the way you hold a hymnal. "Yesterday I paid you with a $10 bill, an old one, soft as a rag, folded down small. I expect it's right there in that bag. I've come to trade you a good crisp one for it, and $1 on top for your trouble." Pruitt looked at her a long moment. He'd been at the auction business a good many years, and he had heard a great many people want a great many things back, but he had never once had a soul come asking to pay extra for the same money they had already spent. "Lady," he said, not unkind, "money's money. One tends the same as the next." "Not this one," Nell said. and she did not explain it, because there was no explaining it that would not have sounded like an old woman gone foolish. But she held his eye while she said it, and there was something in the way she held it that made Pruitt set down his bands of 20s. "It's all going to the bank in an hour," he said. "If it's in there loose with the rest. I haven't got time to hunt a particular bill." "I'll hunt it," she said. "You needn't lift a finger. Just let me put my hand in." He should have said no. He would have told you himself later, when the whole of it came out and people asked, that by every rule of how he ran his business, he ought to have said no and sent her on. But he did not. He turned the canvas bag and pushed it across the folding table to her, and he said, "The 10s are the band with the rubber doubled on it." And he sat back with his cold coffee and watched. Nell did not look at the money. That was the thing he never forgot, telling it after. She did not look. She slid the doubled band off, and she spread the 10s on the table, and she closed her eyes the way a body does when it is reading something only the fingers can read, and she went through them one at a time by feel. New bill, a stiff one, a creased one. And then, 11 or 12 down in the stack, her fingers stopped on one and would not go past it, and her whole face changed, and she opened her eyes and lifted it out. It was worn to the softness of old cloth and folded down into a small, tight square, along creases gone almost white, and it was warm, near about, from being money that had been carried 50 years against the body of a living person before it ever saw the inside of a cash box. She held it up between two fingers, and her hand was not steady. "That one," she said. Pruitt looked at it, and then he looked at her, and whatever he saw made him wave off the crisp 10 she was trying to press on him and the dollar on top of it both. "Just go on," he said, rough in the throat. "Take it. I don't want your money for it." And then, as she was turning for the door with the soft bill folded back into the deep of her pocketbook, where it had ridden for half a century, he said, "Whatever it is, it must have been something." And Nell stopped with her hand on the door and said, "It was," and went out into the morning. For 3 days she looked for his name. She had the bus, and she had the ledger, and she had a hand's thickness of savings bonds that she would not so much as think about cashing until she knew whose mercy she would be spending. And what she did not have was a name to fasten the whole of it to. She went first to the library on Jefferson and sat with the old city directories, running her finger down columns of the dead, and found nothing, because a man who keeps himself secret from the directories too. She asked at the 2 churches that still had their doors open along that stretch of Williamson Road, and the old people there remembered a free bus from years back. Sure they did. Everybody who had been poor and young in Roanoke in those years remembered a free bus, but not a one of them could give the driver a name. He'd been a shape in the big mirror. He had been a kindness with its face turned away. Twice Dennis called the house while she was out and left messages on the machine that got shorter and colder each time. The closing date, the paperwork, the man from Brennan wanting access to walk the lot, and Nell listened to them standing in her kitchen with the ledger open on the table and did not call him back because she had nothing to say to him yet that she could prove. On the 3rd day, she carried the ledger down to the Roanoke City Courthouse and stood in line at the records counter, and that was where she met Harlan Voss. He was not behind the counter. He'd been retired off it some years, a tall, stooped man with reading glasses pushed up into white hair, and he came in 2 mornings a week as a kindness to the young clerks, because 40 years of the county's paper lived in his head and nowhere else. The girl at the window could not help Nell, did not rightly understand what the old woman was even asking for. A name to go with a bus, a deed to go with a ghost, and she was about to send her away when Harlan Voss, sorting a cart of folders along the back wall, heard the one thing that turned him around. "It's painted in the roof of it," Nell was saying, tired now, near the end of herself. "Route 9. Nobody walks. I thought maybe the county had a record of who ran it." Harlan Voss set down his folders. He came up to the counter slow, looking at her over the top of his glasses, and he said, "Say that again." "Route 9, she said. "Nobody walks. Where'd you see that road?" "In a bus I bought, at the Holland sale, and in a book that was welded up inside of it." And Nell, because she was tired and because the old man's face had gone strange and still, lifted the oilcloth bundle onto the counter and turned back the cloth and opened the ledger to the light.
Thank you.
Harlan
We really
Voss looked
appreciate
down
you.
at the small slanting hand running line after line down the page, and he did not touch it for a moment. And when he did touch it, he laid two
Kindness in
fingers
the
on the
ledger
top of
may
the
have
page
once touched
very
her life.
gently, the way you would touch a sleeping face. "Lord have mercy," he said, soft. "I know this hand. I'd know it anywhere on this earth." He looked up at her. "Where do you think you got this, ma'am?" "Out of a sealed tin under the back seat of a $10 bus," Nell said. "I don't know whose it is. He never wrote his name. 40 years of pages, and he never once wrote his own name." "No," Harlan Voss said. "No, he wouldn't have. That'd have been the whole point of it to him." He took his glasses down off his head and set them on his nose and bent to the page, and when he straightened back up, his eyes were wet, and he was smiling in a way that had grief all through it. His name was Walter Boone, he said. He drove a city route in the daytime, regular, paid, and then of an evening and on his off days he ran a second one his own self, in his own bus, that he kept up out of his own pocket for near about 40 years, and it never cost a soul that rode it one thin dime. Folks that had no car, folks that had no fare, folks getting home from the second shift with no other way to get there. He used to say a town where the poor have to walk is a town that's quit on itself. Nobody walks. That was Walter's whole religion, ma'am, right there in 2 words. He shook his head slow. "We knew him here. We knew him because of what he filed, not because he ever told a one of us what he was about. The man would not be thanked. You'd try to thank Walter Boone, and he'd look at you like you'd accused him of something." Nell stood very still at the counter. "I think," she said, and her voice came out careful, "I think he was kind to me once, a long time ago, when I was young." "Is that right?" said Harlan Voss. "It's in the book," she said. 1976. And she turned the pages forward for him with hands that had gone unsteady again, past the years, until she came to the page, and she set her finger under the line that had taken 50 years off her the first time she read it. Harlan Voss leaned down and read it where her finger pointed, read it out loud, slow, in the quiet of the records room, with the young clerk gone still and listening behind him, gave the Hartigan girl $10 and a sandwich, long way from home and scared half to death and would not take charity, told her it was a loan, told her to build something someday and we would call it square. He stopped. He looked up at her over his glasses. "Hartigan," he said. "Eleanor Hartigan," she said. "Nell. I was the Hartigan girl. That was me." For a moment, neither of them said anything at all. And then Harlan Voss did a thing that nobody had asked him to do. He bent back over the page and he ran his finger off to the side of that 1976 line into the narrow margin Walter Boone had ruled down the edge of every page, where the man had kept some small private column of figures that Nell had taken, the once she noticed it, for sums of money. Harlan Voss had spent 40 years reading other men's bookkeeping, and he knew a thing when he saw it that an ordinary eye would skip right over. "These aren't dollars," he said quietly, "down this edge. These are serial numbers, ma'am." He wrote down the number off of bills he gave away. Not all of them. Just a few. He tapped the figures beside her name. Just the ones, I'd guess, that he meant to know again if they ever found their way back home to him. He looked up at her, and the smile was gone now, and something far more careful had come into his face. "You don't happen to still have that $10. You have likely already guessed what Nell Hartigan reached for." She reached into the deep of her pocketbook, past the wrong-spelled letter from Brennan Development, and she brought out the soft folded square of a bill she'd carried against her body since she was 20 years old, and she unfolded it on the counter under the records room light with both their heads bent over it. and Harlan Voss read the little line of figures off the face of it. And then he read the little line of figures Walter Boone had set down in the margin of the page in 1976, and they were, every digit of them, in their order, one and the same. It was the same bill. After 50 years of writing folded in the back of every pocketbook she had owned, after a cash box and a canvas bank bag and a morning's worth of strangers' money, the $10 Walter Boone had pressed into a scared girl's cold hand had come the whole way back around and laid itself down on a courthouse counter not 3 miles from where he had first given it. Nell put her hand flat over it, and she found she could not speak. Harlan Voss took his glasses off again and folded them and stood there a while, letting her have the quiet. Then he said, in the voice of a man who has just remembered something that changes the weight of a room, "Ma'am, there's more of Walter Boone in this building than this book. He filed papers here, years back. A will, and something else along with it. Something he had me notarize my own self, and I will tell you the truth, I never did fully understand at the time why a bus driver wanted it drawn up so particular. He was already turning toward the long wall of drawers behind him. You said somebody's fixing to sell that bus out from under you, and the lot it's parked on." "My son," Nell said, "and a developer." "Then you sit down right there," said Harlan Voss, "and let me go find what Walter Boone left behind in those drawers. Because if I'm remembering it the way I think I am, there's not a developer in this valley going to be able to touch one bolt of that bus, nor the ground under it either." And he went off down the long row of filing drawers with his glasses in his hand, leaving Nell Hartigan standing at the counter in the morning light with the soft bill under her palm and her own name lying open in a dead man's book, waiting to learn what else Walter Boone had thought, 50 years ahead of all of them, to set down in writing and seal away against the day somebody would come trying to clear it all out. What Harlan Voss carried back from the long wall of drawers was not much to look at. A thin folder gone the color of weak tea, with a string tie and a court stamp pressed so old into the corner that it had faded near to nothing. He set it on the counter alongside the ledger and the soft folded bill, and he worked the string loose with the slow care of a man who has learned that the older a paper gets, the gentler it wants handling, and he laid it open flat under the records room light. "Here she is," he said, quiet, almost to his own self. "I notarized this my own hand, going on 30 years back. Walter come in of a Tuesday morning dressed in his Sunday suit, the way a man dresses when he means a thing to outlast him. And he brought a lawyer down with him from the office up on Campbell Avenue. And between the three of us, we set it down so it could never after be pulled apart." He ran one long finger down the page while he read it to her, not word for word, but the meat of it, in the patient way of a man who had spent his working life turning the law back into plain talk for frightened people across a counter. "What Walter done here," he said, "is he made that bus into what we call a charitable trust. Plain meaning of it is, the bus quit being his property the day he signed, and it quit being anybody's to hand down or to sell. The county that auctioned it off out at Hollins had no business doing it, only there wasn't a soul left alive who recollected why. A thing held in trust like this cannot pass to a man's children when he goes, cannot be towed off for junk, cannot be sold out from under itself for $1 nor for 10,000. It does not belong to a person at all. It belongs to a purpose. And the purpose is wrote right here in his own hand." He read it off the page, slow and careful. "For the keeping and the running of the route, free to every rider, for so long as there remains one person in this city who has not got the fare to get home. And whosoever keeps that route running, to them the bus belongs." He turned the stiff page over, and there his finger stopped, and he went quieter than before. On the second sheet, beside Walter Boone's square upright signature, was a second name signed in a hand that Nell Hartigan knew better than she knew her own, the hand that had signed their marriage license and every Christmas card in the 41 years since. Earl Hartigan, her Earl. Your husband, Voss said, and he said it gentle, watching her face. Give Walter the standing right to keep that bus on the corner lot down off Williamson Road. He recorded it right here with the rest. A covenant, the law calls it, and a covenant runs with the land, which is just a long way of saying it sticks to the dirt itself, no matter whose name goes on the deed after. Any man buys that lot. He buys it with Walter's bus sitting square in the middle of it, and the bus holding every right to stay. There is not a developer in the whole of this valley fool enough to close on ground he can never get clear. Nell put 2 fingers down on Earl Hartigan's name where it lay on the old page, and for a long while she did not say anything at all. He never told me, she said at last. 41 years we were married, and he sat across that supper table from me every night of them, and he never once said a word. No, ma'am, Voss said. I don't expect he would have. It was Walter's secret before ever it was Earl's, and a man who keeps another man's secret that careful. Why, he generally carries it on out with him when he goes. He squared the pages together soft. I am going to file a notice on this before you leave this building. There is a probate matter open on Walter Boone that nobody ever did close, and the minute I set this beside it, the clerk's office is bound by law to put a hold on any sale that so much as touches that property until a judge has read every line of it. That hold goes on this morning. It will not be coming off for a good long while. They came for the bus 3 mornings after. Dennis Hartigan's car pulled up first onto the gravel of the corner lot off Williamson Road, where the little short bus sat with its floor swept clean and its long windows washed and throwing back the early sun. And behind Dennis came the man from Brennan Development in a clean gray sedan with a leather folder on the seat beside him, and behind the both of them a tow truck, swinging its back end around and beginning to ease its chains down toward the front bumper with that flat warning beep the big trucks make. Nell came down the 2 steps of the bus with the oilcloth bundle held up against her chest, and she stood there in the gravel in her good dark dress, and she did not walk toward them, and she did not back away. She only stood, the Blue Ridge sitting blue and level behind her, the way it had sat behind everything in this town the whole of her life.
Trust cannot be
Mama.
contested, David.
Dennis got out with his papers in his hand, and his voice already pitched to the tone you use on somebody you have decided is no longer quite able. We talked about this. The closing is Friday. You can't be living down here at a junk lot. It isn't right, and the bus has got to be off before they can grade. The home has your room ready. It's a good place. It's a transition. Nell did not answer her son. She turned instead to the man from Brennan, who had at least the grace to look uncomfortable, and she unwrapped the oilcloth there in the open air, and she held out to him 3 things. The bill of sale from Pruitt with the county stamp on it, made out for $10 even. A certified copy of Walter Boone's recorded trust, still warm off Harlan Voss's machine, with the court seal pressed bright and new into the foot of it. And the covenant under that, with Earl Hartigan's name on it plain. I expect, she said, you had best telephone your office before that truck lays a chain on my bus. The man read. He read the first page, and then he read it again, slower, and a small line came down between his brows, and then he walked off a little ways across the gravel with his phone against his ear and his free hand pressed flat to the top of his head, and when he came back, he did not look at Nell at all. He looked at Dennis. There's a hold on the parcel, he said, recorded. A charitable trust and a covenant going back better than 30 years, and a probate matter open on top of it. We can't close. We can't grade. I'd be surprised if we close inside a year. If we close at all, and I will be honest with you, the company is not going to sit on its money waiting on a dead man's paperwork. He gave the tow operator 1 short chop of the hand, and the man climbed back up and reeled his chains in. And the warning beep started again as the truck drew its empty bed back off the gravel and went away up Williamson Road. The man from Brennan picked his leather folder up off the seat that he had never once had call to open, and he got into his gray car and he drove off after the truck. and Dennis Hartigan stood alone on his dead father's lot with a fistful of closing papers that were not worth the ink laid on them, looking at his mother like a man who has reached for a thing in the dark 100 times and found it always where he left it, and reached this once and found it gone. "You should go on home, Dennis," Nell said, not unkind, only done. And after a while, he did. She opened the route back up on a Friday, which was the very day they were to have closed. She had the engine seen to with the first of Walter Boone's savings bonds, the ones that had lain folded in the welded tin all this time beside the ledger. And she had a man she trusted go over the brakes twice and the tires once, and she set a hand-lettered card in the front glass down at the Williamson Road end where the second shift came off the plant. No fare asked and none taken, hot coffee and a sandwich for anybody that climbed aboard. The first evening, 4 people rode. The second evening, 9. By the end of the second week, there was a line of folks waiting at the curb before she ever pulled up. Men with their lunch pails and old women with their grocery sacks and young ones with no car and no way across town in the dark. And the short bus that the whole of the Hollins lot had laughed at went up and down the working edge of Roanoke of an evening with every seat full and its lamps burning yellow and warm. And the people who climbed down at their own corners would turn at the door to thank her, and Nell Hartigan would look at them the particular way that let them know they need not. One evening near dark, a girl got on at the bottom of Williamson Road with a duffel bag held against her, and not 1 cent in her pocket, and a look on her face that Nell knew from the deep inside of her own bones. Scared, and a long way from home, and too proud by half to say so. The girl stood on the step, counting nothing in her open hand. Nell took down a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and put it into that hand and folded the girl's cold fingers shut over it. And when the girl tried to give back the few small coins she did have, Nell closed those away too and turned her by the shoulder toward a seat up near the heater and put the bus in gear and pulled out into the dusk with the girl riding safe in the long mirror. She drove the route clean to the end of it that night, and then she swung the empty bus back around to the corner lot and parked it where Earl had let it stand all these years, and Walter had meant it to stand forever. She cut the engine. She sat a minute in the dark of the cab, and then she taped a thing to the dash where the headlamp glow would catch it, and she left the cabin lights burning a while before ever she went up to the house. By dark, the old bus sat alone on the saved lot, lit gold from the inside, taped to the dash beside a card that read, "Walter Boone," the soft $10 bill.